Governor Pritzker wants to consolidate local police and fire pension boards, and a survey shows support for a progressive income tax. We'll talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the program where we talk about state issues, sometimes federal issues, and how they might just affect your life. I'm Bernie Schoenburg from the State Journal-Register. It's been an interesting time, even though the legislature's not been in lately. With me today to discuss things going on, now that Governor Pritzker is back out doing things after his leg is healed up some, Jerry Nowicki is back. He is State House reporter for Capital News Illinois. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
And Dave Dahl is here, WTAX radio in Springfield, man about town.
Hello.
Hello. So, as I opened the show, I talked about there are more than 600, I think there are 649 or something like it, individual police and pension fire boards run by cities, police departments, fire departments across Illinois. Now that's not a state pension program, but the pension programs for those groups are run locally. Like the Springfield has a board of firefighters, I believe current and retired, who make their own investments. The police department, same thing, and that's all across the state. So given that local government pensions are another drag on property taxes, and a lot of the rules for what they can get in pension, I believe, are passed by the legislature, there was a commission put together to recommend how to handle this problem, and the recommendation has come out saying just late in the week that there should be a consolidation and new pension boards with management and labor to oversee one for every police department pension board outside the city of Chicago, because they've got their own bigger problems, I guess, and one for all the fire pension boards. Jerry, this is something that is being pushed, and the governor says he's for it. In the past, local governments and some of the police and fire groups have not been for this, but what do we think is going to happen?
It looks like the fire departments have come out in favor of it. And
or the association there.
Right.
My association.
And the Fraternal Order of Police has been against it. The problem that that the police are probably looking at is there are better funded pension funds and lesser funded funds just kind of being tied up into one. And I don't know what kind of safeguards there are against that or will be against that in any new legislation, but we'll see how it develops as the legislature comes back.
Right. And the governor's for it. Dave, I guess with a lot of police departments saying, we want local control, and the fire association saying, this is a good thing. It'll be obviously the kind of battle that might not get taken up immediately. I can't imagine they would do this before next spring in the legislature, because there are so many local folks who are interested in this.
The police unions say we need public input, we need police input. We didn't get it, we're not happy. And so it's a little bit of a newsmaker that the fire unions are for it.
I would say that.
And this is something pushed heavily by the Illinois Municipal League. Brad Cole, he used to be mayor of Carbondale, is in charge of the IML. He makes it sound good.
Yeah, well, the Fraternal Order of Police, they came out with something saying law enforcement officers were not allowed to participate, provide feedback, or be shown that this was anything other than an attempt to grab officers' money, said FOP Labor Council Executive Director Sean Roselieb. But then the governor responded to that, and this was before the firefighters statewide organization came out saying that they're actually for this. The governor said these are the folks who run the junkets. The recent one cost about $8 million to the taxpayers to send people to Lake Geneva on a retreat. There were a lot of local pension funds that had a retreat in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, and it was reported on by Mark Maxwell of WCIA-TV out of Champaign. He's based in Springfield. Just showing that there are all of these pension fund managers who got together to discuss, best practices in pension fund management. So it's a continuing problem. Jerry, before we started taping the show, you mentioned this would not be a state government pension fund. I mean,
right.
Because these are all local governments. These are fed by, property taxes or whatever. However, local governments put the money together to pay police and firefighter pensions, and sometimes they pass special fees in cities to help cover this stuff.
Right.
And so it's just another, it's apart from the state pension system problem where you have 5 pension systems for various kinds of workers, including teachers and state workers.
Yeah, it's not going to move the needle on the $134 billion pension liability. And
this is separate. I will say the model of this, as opposed to individual pension funds, and the state pension funds have lagged behind, as you say. They're actuarially, they don't have hundreds of millions of dollars or billions, I guess, or whatever. They have a lot of money that for future payments in order to be sound and fully funded. The state took a lot of pension holidays. They borrowed money to pay for the pension system, and then they have to pay that back. And in the past, they have had some pension holidays where they didn't pay into the pension fund so that they could continue funding operations. The municipal league, I'm sure, would be arguing that the IMRF, the Illinois Municipal Retirement Fund, which all cities have to have their pension funds through, that is a quasi-state agency, I guess. It's run kind of independently, but the cities are required to make the employer payments entirely every year, or they get sanctioned. I mean, there is a way that the cities are forced to pay. And so that is a well-funded system. That is, I think it's nearly fully funded, if not fully funded. And you don't hear IMRF problems, for your basic city workers other than police and firefighters across the state. And so I'm sure that this task force is looking at something like that to handle things better, and then to have, I guess, better economies of scale if you only have a board of for the firefighters and the pensioner and the police, union members and retirees and management, and you have 2 separate funds, but you don't have 600 funds. You're probably not going to have quite as many management fees or expenses, and you maybe get a better deal from what you buy.
Economy of scale for 200, Alex.
For 200 what?
Alex.
We're on Jeopardy now.
Reference.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Economies of scale.
I'm not smart enough to watch Jeopardy enough, so thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And we wish Alex well. On the issue of money, Governor Pritzker obviously will be pushing. It's been a little bit quiet for a while. Something the legislature passed this past year, a constitutional amendment to change the income tax structure of Illinois, change our constitution to say that we don't have to have a flat income tax. It can be just to take that out, so it would allow a graduated income tax, which is what the governor wants. He says it can raise for the state more than $3.5 billion a year, and he says it would only come from the top 3% of earners, and everybody else would pay the same or less under some rates that they passed. Of course, opponents of this say that's not true, and that the legislature will come in and raise everybody, get down to the middle class and raise more. But November of 2020, which is getting closer all the time because we're getting closer to next year's election, this constitutional amendment will be on the ballot, and the University of Illinois Springfield, doing kind of a consortium of U of I related groups and policy centers, did a survey that showed 67% approval of the idea of a graduated income tax in Illinois. And that's up about 10% from a year ago. Obviously, the groups that don't want that tax, that say, more, it's irresponsible, it'll just raise more money, don't like it.
67% of the people who believe they're not rich.
Is that could be
just a guess on my part?
Yeah.
We're going to open up thinking, yikes, I'm richer than I thought.
Yeah, but this is obviously good news for Governor Pritzker. At least he can say that there's a survey out there saying this.
Right. You could point to the survey in your ads and whatnot. I don't know how extensive it was or who was interviewed.
Well, it was more than 1,000 people. Actually, it was an online survey, but apparently this is being done. I talked to the survey director at University of Illinois Springfield. It's more than 1,000 people who are selected by, I think it's an out-of-state firm that does this for various groups, I think including maybe Pew Research or something, or the Pew Center, various surveys. You find people who will represent the state, even you try to make up for the fact, even if they have computers, for people who don't, you try to make sure that you get a sample of the state, and then you that's your sample as opposed to random dialing, which I guess is going by the wayside over time because so many people have cell phones and nobody's phone number is listed anymore. So anyway, they say that they think it's a representative sample of the state, and it was registered voters over 18. So Dave, do you believe surveys like this?
Not necessarily, but they're interesting to talk about. The last few minutes, anyway, have proven that.
Well, there we go. Well, they were releasing some results kind of every couple of days from that survey that was done kind of in mid-September. And interestingly, they found that it was a higher number than the previous year, but 61% of people in this survey said they had thought about leaving Illinois within the last 12 months when they were surveyed, although most of them didn't take action to do so. You know, it said like 24% or whatever thought, or some number thought that they would maybe want to look outside the state for another job, but only 5% had applied for other jobs, and so it wasn't that much. So that's up. On the other hand, they found that Pritzker's job approval was up to, I believe it's 57%. So they kind of like where he's going, and they thought the direction of the state was going in the right direction. It was 24%, which sounds bad, but that's up from 12% a year previous. So it shows a 100% increase in the positive view. Again, interesting numbers. There's been a lot of bad-mouthing the state. Certainly, Governor Rauner liked to say how terrible our business climate was, and Governor Pritzker tries to have a different view.
And the governor's not up for re-election. Presumably he runs again for another 3 years. So it's definitely early to be talking about job approval, et cetera.
Yeah, although Jerry, it is interesting. There's a lot of discussion that you just hear people say, oh, why would you move to Illinois or move out of Illinois? I know Governor Pritzker wants to change that narrative, so maybe this helps a little, even though you're still only saying 24% right direction. Maybe, there's a long way to go.
Right. I mean, thought about leaving Illinois is one thing. 61%. I've thought about, hey, it'd be nice to live on the beach, whatever, in the coast.
Yeah, how many of
whatever,
those people were holding snow shovels when they answered?
Right. Yes, right, and apparently, again, the survey showed that they were not taking that much action. Well, I'm going to, one other thing that I guess the state law now says that the governor's office is supposed to every 5 years put out a 5-year plan. So Governor Quinn put one out, and Governor Pritzker released a 5-year economic plan just this last week. And as Crane Chicago Business said, the most striking thing in the report is its call for emphasizing help for 7 industry clusters: agriculture and agriculture tech, energy, information technology, life sciences, healthcare, manufacturing, transportation, logistics, and small business. And the idea was, governor's just saying, we want to emphasize these areas. Illinois has strengths, he's trying to say, and we will move forward in these areas. Does a plan like this mean very much, Jerry?
Well, it's a shame that it didn't fall on Governor Rauner to put one of these out, because I would have liked to have seen if he had a plan at any point.
I think it was the law he was supposed to, by the way.
Was he just late in doing so?
I thought it was every 5 years, so I thought maybe the last one fell on Quinn, but who knows? Anyway, the plan is really interesting. I thought one of the other really interesting parts was doubling the amount of MAP grants available to students, because a lot of the outmigration we see is from that college age range. I forget the exact numbers, but it was around 50% of recent high school graduates that went to a 4-year university decided to leave Illinois to do it. So I read about all that stuff, that could happen one way or another, but the MAP grants really stood out to me.
Right, and that's really interesting, because during the budget impasse in the previous administration that lasted more than 2 years, one of the things that either got late funding or no funding for a while was these grants. So thousands of students who would normally get them, and these are low-income students who are getting, what is it, $5,000 or $7,000 or $10,000 stipends to help them go to college, or we're not getting those. And trying to keep students going to Illinois colleges is a big deal, because there's been a lot of poaching from colleges across the border, et cetera, et cetera. So we shall see. There is some, I often mention federal stuff. There's been an interesting situation developing late in the week. Congressman John Shimkus, who is used to represent Springfield under the previous map, but is from Collinsville, and has announced that he's not running for re-election. but he told KMOX, big radio station in St. Louis, that he is breaking with President Trump because he's so upset that President Trump pulled U.S. troops out of Syria, which has allowed Turkey to attack the Kurdish people who helped America, fought alongside Americans against ISIS.
Shimkus, military guy, by
and
the way.
Shimkus is a graduate of West Point, which he certainly made a big issue of in 1996 when he was running, and of course that's when he said he would, term limit himself to, I believe it was 12 years, but then when Denny Hastert and George W. Bush asked him to stay on, he stayed on, but finally he is retiring. But he only in the last couple of weeks was among 4 members of Illinois Congress, Mike Bost, Adam Kinzinger, Davis.
Not Kinzinger.
No, not Kinzinger.
Davis and LaHood.
LaHood.
And
That's right. Kinzinger has been very critical of the president for this and some other things. And Davis, co-chairs or honorary co-chairs or whatever of the Trump re-election campaign. So Shimkus has pulled out of that. How big a deal is that?
Well, if you're keeping track of who is on the Trump train, here's someone who's not. But, Shimkus has a largely rural district. He's a lame duck, so not that much.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's I don't know what you read into that or not. His district will probably be drawn out into something else in the next.
Well, that's after the next census, right?
Yeah.
So.
And it was with all the impeachment stuff. I really thought the decision in Syria would have sort of fallen by the wayside, but with guys like Shimkus and Kinzinger making those type of comments, it's really kind of kept it there in view, and he's really taken a lot more flack for that than he does for even his tweets sometimes, because there's such a lot of blowback from that. And the guys like Senator Hastings in the Illinois legislature, they've all been tweeting about it. All these military men, he went to West Point as well, they fought alongside some of those Kurds, some of the Kurdish fighters.
Turn our backs on allies.
Right.
You can't count on us.
Right, and Kinzinger's talked that way, but that's what Shimkus said. Actually, Representative LaHood of Peoria, who represents part of Springfield, Congressman LaHood, Darren LaHood, also said, Dave, you were with me when we talked to him in Springfield, and he said he feared it would lead to, was the word? Slaughter of Kurdish troops who are our allies, and he was very upset with the president for doing this and wished he would reconsider. And that was before the Turkish attack started on the Kurdish part of Syria.
Yeah, it didn't take long for those attacks, by the way. And one more note on Shimkus. I mean, not out of disrespect, I just don't think he's that big a player. We've lost Shimkus. Wow.
Well, I think has he been, of course, Republicans can't chair committees anymore, but he is a longtime member of Congress, more than 20 years now.
Yes, he is.
So, and a very loyal Republican, too.
And he has been, yes, indeed. So back to the state. WBEZ radio in Chicago, public radio. Dave McKinney did a story. He's a former reporter in Springfield for the Chicago Sun-Times, and he is a reporter now for WBEZ, does very good work, and claimed in his story that he read all 900 cases that the Illinois Supreme Court has handled since soon-to-be Chief Justice Ann Burke joined the court in, I think, the mid-2000s. And he found about, I think it's 10 cases in which she did not recuse herself, but her husband had represented companies involved, such as Commonwealth Edison. And her husband, of course, is Ed Burke, who is a 50-year alderman in Chicago who is currently under indictment under allegations that he was squeezing people doing business with the city to do also business with his law firm. He has denied that. Ann Burke, of course, says she's separate. It raised the profile, I think, a little farther than it had been of how interesting it is that Ann Burke, has going to be the next Chief Justice because of the regular rotation of what the justices do. But again, you're not responsible necessarily for what your spouse does, and he's not been convicted of anything. Dave, your thoughts?
Well, it looks bad. And some people think if it looks bad, that's bad enough. It is bad. But, on the other hand, it's yet another story under the heading of Gotta Love Illinois.
Do you have to love Illinois?
You have to, you do.
Yeah, by all accounts, from those that cover the courts, Justice Burke is very thoughtful in her decisions and asks the right questions, but he said it looks bad.
Yeah. And I will
A lot of people can't get
Michael
past
Sneed,
that.
the lady named Michael Sneed, who is the longtime Sun-Times columnist, who often talks about Ann Burke as a person who kind of helped develop the Special Olympics, and then the Kennedys picked it up, and she's got a good record of doing good things. So we'll leave it out there, see where it goes, and move on. There was a very interesting story in the Chicago Tribune about the area that Mike Madigan, the Speaker of the House, represents in the Illinois legislature. An alderman from the southwest side of Chicago there is Marty Quinn. And as he was running for re-election this last time, there was a college student from DePaul named David Krupa who was getting on the ballot. And the story was that apparently Madigan forces, and this is coming out in, I think, Discovery for another kind of investigation, but more than 2,500 people signed affidavits saying, well, I signed David Krupa's petitions, but I take it back, so that they could, and it turns out that less than 200 of those people actually had signed the petitions, but apparently they were talked to many times by people in the Democratic organization there, and it just made it look rather heavy-handed that they were trying to keep somebody off the ballot. As it turned out, the challenge to Mr. Krupa's petitions was dropped, and Marty Quinn, the alderman, won with more than 80% of the vote, but it didn't paint a very pretty picture of politics in Mr. Madigan's area.
No, the more you read about the 13th ward, the more anachronistic or old-timey politics it seems. It's really interesting every new article you read.
Well, and it looked like harassment of these people who lived in the ward, and bullying and yelling, constant phone calls.
Well, there were some anecdotes in the Trib story talking about people who were visited at their home several times and called several times until they signed or until they said, get out of here.
It's almost Mapesian in its scope.
And they were afraid of losing services and whatnot, city services and municipal services.
Which is not supposed to happen in such cases,
No.
but we'll see. Dave, there's speaking of things that aren't particularly the best going on in Illinois, we know and you were there and I was there, some weeks ago, there was federal agents raided in offices of Martin Sandoval, who's a state senator from Chicago, also represents part of Cicero, where one of his offices is. We don't exactly know what they are searching for, although the redacted search warrants, indicated if things of value were being passed back and forth.
Gives the impression that they accuse him of being a shakedown artist.
Well, and he is chairman of the Transportation Committee in the Senate.
He and Menard wrote up or had a large part in writing up the infrastructure.
Well, they traveled the state trying to find out what projects were
I wonder
needed.
if they were in the same car when they did that.
Yeah, and
I ought to ask Senator Menard
and
that.
you talked to Senator Menard about this, I believe.
We had him on our morning show.
And his view. So the question is, some people have said, in fact, the governor said, in order to make the process pristine and to take a shadow away from it, that Senator Sandoval should step away or be taken off if he doesn't step down from the chairmanship of the Transportation Committee as we roll out the $45 billion capital plan. Senator Menard, I think he said it would be helpful. Is that correct?
He said that it's all going to be vetted. It's not just something where there's one person's fingerprints on it. He didn't think there'd be anything to taint the
at this point. Okay.
$45 billion bill. I noted shortly before I left to come out here that, of all people, Representative Alan Skillicorn, a Republican from East Dundee, who has gained notoriety as somewhat of a bomb thrower, he thinks the entire bill should be repealed and rewritten.
Yeah, well, and I think he also said that the gasoline tax should be taken off, but then he's opposed to pretty much any tax because, he was the one who also flirted with running for Congress and then I believe decided not to.
So, in fact, Controller Mendoza was asked about this at the Hispanic Heritage event, and she said, in fact, the exact question was, have you gotten any requests for payment from or via Senator Sandoval? And she said, no, not that I know of. The whole thing is terrible. He should step down. I know he's innocent until proven guilty, but he still should step down as chairman while this is going on. And everything is checked and double checked, and so far there's no chicanery or shenanigans or tomfoolery or anything like that.
And
those are my words, not hers.
And of course, and President Cullerton of the Senate has said, there's no proof of any wrongdoing at this point, so he has not taken action on that. Just on another quick issue, Governor Pritzker had an event this week to promote tax breaks for data centers. The cloud is actually these giant buildings, and they want tax breaks for that. That's one of the pro-business provisions that was put in kind of the state budget just before they passed it, and we'll see if we get more of those projects in Illinois.
Yeah, everyone, the chamber certainly seemed like it was a no-brainer, and it'd get them here pretty quickly, so we'll see.
And that's something that the business community could hang their hat on and say, okay, the Democrats passed a bunch of stuff we don't like, but we like some of the tax incentives for business. This is one of those. Mm-hmm. Well, we will be watching as more candidates emerge for the primary, which will come up in March, but we're in a lull there, but plenty of stuff going on clearly. So for now, Jerry Nowicki, thanks for your commentary. Dave Dahl, thanks for your help. I'm Bernie Schoenburg. Thank you, and we'll see you next time on Capitol View.